There is nothing we cannot accomplish.
But I think it appropriate that I share my thought with my fellow Vermonters. For the past several weeks, I have been struggling with a very difficult decision. Even more difficult because of the larger impact in the Senate and also the nation.
Jim Jeffords was one of a kind.
An odd duck.
What political scientists call a New England Republican, sort of a breed you rarely see anymore.
Rock rib Republican. But he was one of the liberal Republicans.
He just said what he thought.
A thorn in the Republican establishment side for many years.
He was the Republican who ran against the tide from the very beginning.
Increasingly, I find myself in disagreement with my party. In order to best represent my state of Vermont, my own conscience and principles I have stood for my whole life, I will leave the Republican Party and become an independent. Control of the Senate will be changed by my decision. I will caucus with the Democrats.
And that's why when he broke with the Republican Party in 2001, it wasn't entirely unexpected by anyone, but it was an incredible move on his part.
You are, for the first time in your life, not going to the Republican convention. You are no longer a Republican.
I felt very strongly when I made up my mind that I had to change the structure of Congress and do some dramatics to do it, that this country was going so far in the wrong direction that I could make a real difference and try to get it turned around and going in a better direction.
It was an enormous personal act of courage, really. He felt that he had just been pushed by the Republican Party into accepting a range of budget cuts and environmental policies that he could not accept.
And when they cut his special education programs, which is his baby, just get sick of it. That's it. I'm out of here.
He did not switch allegiance and become a Democrat. He became an independent, but the impact was the same.
So now you have 50 Democrats plus one independent and 49 Republicans on the other side. Now the Democrats had an absolute majority. Vermont had transformed the U.S. Senate with a switch from Jim. Little tiny Vermont has now changed the organization of the Senate.
I mean, that not just electrified Vermont, it electrified the nation. What Jim Jeffords had stood for, a kind of Vermont brand of republicanism, socially liberal and certainly tolerant. And at a certain point, Jim Jeffords had this act of conscience.
I think it's going to make people think what the Republican Party really stands for here in Vermont and nationally. And there are those of us that have thought that in the last few years that they've made a turn to the right, which are bad for the state and for the country.
It was probably as dramatic an event as occurred in Vermont politics.
He was under huge pressure from Republicans not to do it.
Trent Lott, who was the Republican leader at the time in the U.S. Senate, called it a coup of one.
We're all surprised, yes. I knew that he did not feel that the administration reflected what he believed. And this particularly was an educational issue. It's a step that most people don't take, but that was Jim Jeffords. He felt that strongly in the issue.
He lost a lot of friends because he did that, but he never wavered.
Many of my supporters will be disappointed.
I didn't agree with that, to be honest. I understand that he felt uncomfortable in the Republican Party. A lot of people were uncomfortable having him there, but he had just been reelected to a 6-year term months before. And we worked very hard to make sure he didn't have a right-wing primary challenge to pave the way for a nomination that was uncontested.
But I was not elected to this office to be something that I am not. This comes as no surprise to Vermonters, because independence And it's the Vermont way.
I would say on balance it was enormously favorable for Jeffords. I think most Vermonters in 2000 were not thrilled with the direction that the National Republican Party was headed.
I guess I still don't really understand, despite the fact that he wrote 2 books about it, what prompted him to make that very dramatic decision. There are a number of Republicans who feel betrayed.
I would like to ask if you were so disenchanted with the Republican Party, why you did not resign and run as a Democrat and not disenfranchise people like myself who voted for you many times.
He would have been elected overwhelmingly as an independent if he had done that rather than simply switch without the voters having an opportunity to weigh in.
I considered that strongly, but we did polling among people, and that they did not think adversely of me for switching parties, and so therefore we went that route.
Vermonters are Vermonters. They're generally respectful when people change because of their convictions, no matter what they are.
Now, of course, the anticipation was that this would bring a screeching halt to Junior Bush's agenda. And
it was good news, bad news for Democrats, because good news, we went to the majority for a year and a half. The bad news, it so energized the Republican Party, they took back the majority a year and a half later.
Jim Jeffords, I think, brought a real sense of Vermont to Washington.
So just wonderful to be here, to be back in Vermont, and see how real life is all about.
They called him Jeezum Jim. You wouldn't, to meet him, think this guy was a Harvard graduate.
Do you have a tuxedo?
Yeah, I finally got one. I used to go with a suit with a bow tie that looked close to a tuxedo, but that got bad comments.
He chopped his own wood. He wore flannel shirts. He was not an ideologue. He cared about programs that impact people in the HIV/AIDS battle, for example, environmental protection, caring for U.S. veterans. Jeffords was a veteran.
He famously lived in his office for a while, in a trailer for a short time. So he was frugal. That reflected Vermonters' values.
We just push it in and push a button, and our vote is recorded.
The fact that he was so unpredictable and independent in his voting seemed to appeal a lot to the people of our state.
Are you planning at this point that you would run in 2006?
It's my present intention to run for re-election. Yes, that's my present intention. I feel so strongly about the needs of this nation that I can contribute with my seniority in the Senate.
Production funding for Beyond Bernie was provided in part by 3 Hats Bookkeeping.
Do you want to spend less time bookkeeping? Meet 3 Hats Bookkeeping. We pair you with a dedicated bookkeeping team. Each month, your team categorizes your transactions into accurate financial statements. Bookkeeping done for you.